Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We're on to our next segment, and this one we're going to be talking about rumors related to the college application process. And joining me for this one is my colleague and another former Brandeis admissions officer. Kind of crazy, we have two on in the same day. Blair Dixon. Hi, Blair.
Hi, Beth. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for listening today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, there are so many rumors. Anyone who's been listening to this podcast for any amount of time will know that my least favorite phrase in admissions or in this world, in this space is I heard that, because almost always what follows is either a half truth or an outright falsehood. So, well, why don't we start with a big one? And, I think probably important for our listeners to understand is that while some of these are rumors, they may not be completely false. There may be some nuance. Usually there's nuance in general. But so here's a big one that we hear from students and parents, and that is that my letters of recommendation must be from teachers in subject matter related to my major, or that one of them has to be from math science and the second from the humanities. So talk to me about the actuality of this.
Yeah, this is a really good one that I'm getting a lot these days, speaking with 11th graders going into the summer. This is the time where you should be thinking about this point. So I'm glad you brought this up. This one's not necessarily true. So when I advise students in receiving their letters of recommendation, I always tell them the number one criteria should be asking a teacher who knows you best, who you have a great relationship with, and who you feel really confident can advocate for you in that way. And so, it does make sense that the teachers that you have the best relationships with may be in subject matter that you're more interested in, or, what you may want to major in college. So we do often see that correlation that, our computer science kids or engineering kids have a request letters of recommendation from their math or science teachers. Same for those humanities focused kids. But you don't have to follow this really strict rule of thumb that if I'm going into English, I need a letter of recommendation from my English teacher. That being said, some programs, you want to do your research on schools on your list to ensure that they don't have particular requirements, that they don't need one teacher from the math or sciences and one from the humanities and social studies. So just, do your research, go to the admissions websites, read into the application requirements and see if this is a stipulation. But for the most part, you really want to kind of go into your recommendation requesting process asking the teachers who could really advocate for you, highlighting your personal qualities, your strengths, your interests, etc.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, bottom line, you want people who like you and know you, and that is absolutely the most important thing. Everything else is gravy, like you say. All right,
Exactly.
let's go into this next one. It's such a hot button right now. We've talked about this in previous shows, but I think it's a good thing to reiterate and bring up again. And this is the idea that if I apply test optional to a school that is test optional, the admissions officers will just assume that I have terrible scores. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I get this question probably every single day of my life. It's a good one. It's a good question. But I feel like folks don't believe me when I tell them if a college says they're test optional, they are truly test optional. They're not trying to trick you. They're not trying to pull a fast one. Believe it or not, admissions officers want the best for you, and they want you to be able to put your best foot forward. And I think what we see anecdotally and in many studies is testing is not the best representation of many students' abilities. You may be a star in the classroom, but you sit in front of that test and panic sets in and you get test anxiety, or for whatever reason, your scores just don't reflect your academic ability. And so this wave of test optional has allowed students to highlight the pieces of their academic achievement that they would like to highlight. So if a college says we are test optional, you decide if you want us to see your test scores, you should take that at face value. A good rule of thumb, if your scores fall within the middle 50% of test scores or above for that particular institution, you should go ahead and send your scores because they would be considered competitive in that pool. But if they fall below that middle 50%, don't think too much about it. You should, likely refrain from submitting your test scores because it's more likely to hurt your application than help. So yes, take that at face value. Test optional truly means test optional. I think experientially, Beth, you may be able to attest to this as well. Admissions officers don't have time to think too deeply about why didn't Johnny submit his test scores? Like we didn't have time to really make assumptions or think too hard about why students made the choices that they did. We just use what's in front of us. And if there are no scores, we kind of shift that focus on your academic read more towards your in-school academics. So the rigor of your classes in high school and your grades, how you performed in those classes.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Nobody has time to spend thinking about why something's not there. And I mean, let's be real too. Right now, if you live in the state of California, it may be almost impossible for you to get a test date within a reasonable driving distance. So it could be that you still can't access the test. So, and then the only other thing I would add there is that if you really aren't sure if you should submit your scores or not, because they're somewhere right in the middle there,
Yeah.
I have seen many times where admissions officers say, just call. You could call. You don't even have to give your name. You could say, hey, my score is X. Should I submit it? And they may say, don't, that's not going to help you. Or yes, please do submit it. I think that will be more of a help than you realize, right?
Great point.
Never a bad thing.
Yeah, we are just people. Like when you go to the admissions office, it's just me. Like you can ask us very transparent questions, and admissions officers, like I said, they want the best for you. They want to help you on your application process. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone if there's any anxiety or questions in your mind.
Yep. Looking for reasons to admit, not to deny.
Exactly.
Okay, next rumor, that being undecided about my major is going to hurt my chances of admission.
Yeah. I personally think it is a crazy expectation to put on 17, 18-year-olds to just like have your entire academic and career trajectory figured out. I am a huge advocate of undecided applicants. When I was an admissions officer, I loved reading undecided applications. It felt like a blank slate. Usually undecided students have multiple interests and they are just having a hard time narrowing down and like deciding on one particular major. And so to me, that showed intellectual curiosity, a love of learning, and like I said, broad and diverse interests, which is a quality that many colleges are looking for these days. So this is false. Being an undecided applicant will not categorically harm your chances of admission. Statistically, about half of the applicants every single year are undecided going into college. And so if you're an 11th grader right now and you're kind of panicking, it's summer before your application process and you're like, what am I going to list as my major? First of all, you have time to figure that out. We have time to evaluate your interests. And if you do land on subject matter that is more interesting to you than others, great, list that on your application. But if it's time to submit and you have to list a major that you want to apply into or a major that you're interested in, because remember, some colleges you're applying into the major, many you're not. You're applying to the institution, you're applying to Brandeis, and then once you get there, you have the opportunity to declare a major 1 or 2 years in. So if you're needing to list a major on your application, undecided will be an option for you. I would be a little bit careful if you are interested in maybe some more selective or restricted or capped majors are phrases that we often hear. Engineering is a commonly restricted major, business, sometimes computer science. Excuse me, my Ring doorbell is going off as we speak. But if you are interested, there's an inkling that you might be wanting to declare one of those more restricted majors. Do some research, reach out to the admissions office to see if there are any restrictions transferring into an engineering major from an undecided kind of start in your undergraduate experience.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think also if for some reason you manage to find the few colleges out there that don't offer undecided, it's probably a sign, right? If they don't offer it, it's probably not a good fit for you. And that's another big theme that we've been talking about. But I, like you, loved an undecided applicant. I always thought that was great. So
yeah, it's fun. I love a blank slate, someone open to opportunities. That's a great sign.
exactly. All right, next one. I can reuse the same supplemental essay for multiple applications. What do you think about this one?
This is a hard no. This is a hard no for me. The supplemental essay is your one opportunity to speak directly to the institution to where you're applying. The college essay, your personal statement, should be general. It shouldn't be a love letter to NYU. It should be an essay that you can send to every college on your common application, and it reads well. It's focused on you, not the school to where you're applying. Supplements are very different. Every school has their own, if they have a supplemental essay, they have their own question that they're asking for their own reasons. A lot of the times the supplemental essay is where admissions officers are really determining your interest in their campus. So demonstrated interest is a huge piece of the process some places. And the supplement is where they're like, okay, tell us why you want to come to Tulane. And so these should be heavily researched. You should be using very specific examples. And my rule of thumb is if you can take out Tulane and switch in LSU, and that essay still makes a decent amount of sense, that is not your strongest supplement. It should be so personalized to the school where you're applying that it can't be used for another institution. And you may be thinking, yes, that makes sense for the why blank or the why this school essay, but even for those supplemental prompts like how will you contribute to community on our campus? How will you contribute to diversity on campus? You should still be using specific, club or organization names, if there are particular affinity groups on campus that you look forward to connecting with. Yes, there are some commonalities in these features from campus to campus, but you should be trying your best to make these supplementals as unique to the school you're applying to as possible.
Yep. Could not. That is such important advice. And so, yes, that one's so false. It's very false. All right. Here's another one. The earlier I get my application in, the better. As in, like, the deadline is October 31st or November 1st. I think it's really important that if I get it in by August 31st, I'm going to have a better chance. What's your take?
This is a myth as well. The one kind of like caveat is if a schooling has rolling admissions, then this is true. So the admissions officers with rolling admissions, they're reading applications as they roll in. And they're making admissions decisions as those applications come in. So, they only have so many seats. If they're getting down to their maximum number of applicants that they can admit, they have to start getting a little bit more selective. So this is true for rolling admissions. For schools that have firm deadlines, so, January 1st or November 15th for an early action or early decision, this is not the case. Yes, admissions officers, they'll read applications as they come in, but a little bit of like a lifting of the curtain to what like an admissions committee looks like. There's a lot of shaping of the class, we call it. So where you put people in the class, you pull people out, you massage the class to kind of look at it holistically. So comparing applicants to applicants and making sure that you're ending up with a first year class that reaches all of your institutional goals, and just, is the optimal, incoming class for that campus. So if you submit your application at 11:55, the day of the deadline, that won't hurt your application. Please don't. You want to save time for technical difficulties if anything
Yes.
happens down to the wire. Let's not wait until a couple of minutes before the deadline. But if for whatever reason, that's what you have to do, just the fact that you submitted your application at that time won't hurt your application.
Yeah, it was literally never a conversation when I was an admissions officer at Penn. Ooh, well, this person submitted it early. We actually also never even got files to read until after
Oh.
the deadline. So they waited until those came in and had all been triaged before they even released them to us. Obviously, as our listeners can hear right now, excuse me, they do this differently at different schools.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that committee happened after we had read the entire pool of applicants. So even if you were reading a little earlier, you weren't going to be asked to discuss that student until much later in the process.
Exactly.
Very quickly, last one, we have 2 minutes left. Senior grades don't matter. And for those seniors who are still doing work, what's your take on this one?
Friends, this is false. You cannot take your foot off of the gas just because it's senior year. I get it. Senioritis is so real. But for many application processes, this is, again, you need to do your research and see what the application requirements are for the schools on your list. But for many processes, your application is not considered complete until your school counselor submits some degree of senior grades on your behalf.
Yeah.
So, depending on the deadline that you're targeting, so if you're targeting an early action deadline in the November times, at least a term of your grades, so a 6 or 9 weeks progress report or term grades would be available for your school counselor to send. And many will need those first term grades to be able to read your full application. If you're applying regular decision, so January deadlines, you finished a semester at that point. So a good chunk of your senior year will be factored into the review of your application. This isn't necessarily across the board. Some schools don't take senior grades into consideration, but this is, I would say, a good rule of thumb is don't tank senior year.
Yes, because then there's also, right, the sending the final transcript. And if that doesn't look good, guess what? Now you may be starting on academic probation, and that might be the least of your worries because there are schools out there who will rescind over bad grades.
Yes.
So
Yes. We don't want that. So, just try and maintain that same level of performance, similar level of performance that you've demonstrated throughout your time in high school.
Yes, and then you can enjoy a lovely summer that you're not going to enjoy junior year because you have too much college application work to do.
Yeah.
Blair, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're talking all about rumors related to saving and paying for college, and you definitely don't want to miss this one.